Before today's video, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on the latest videos. If you want to see a case or topic covered by Paranormally Listed, then go to criminallylisted.com and fill out the questionnaire under the Suggest a Case tab. Number 3. The Ville De Paris. When referring to the history of flight, most people point to the Wright brothers' historic launch at Kill Devil Hills in North Carolina as the first time humans were able to take to the air. But this is not technically true. In fact, humans were breaking the surly bonds of Earth for at least 20 years before Wilbur and Orville were even born. In the mid-19th century, hot air ballooning was the next big thing. All over the world, balloonists were soaring over cities and towns, for the first time getting an actual bird's-eye view of their world. But it didn't take an expert or an engineer to go up in a hot air balloon. Quite the contrary, it was a popular hobby for anyone with deep enough pockets. So, as you can imagine, a lot of inexperienced hobbyists didn't live through many trips. In Denmark, in 1851, Joseph Tardini tried to impress tens of thousands of citizens in Copenhagen with one such balloon flight, only to be killed when his balloon ripped open, sending him crashing into the harbor. 2 years later, M. Louis Deschamps of France was thrown out of his balloon's basket due to high winds. Spectators watched in horror as he fell to his death, as his balloon drifted miles away on its own before crashing down. Still, such crashes didn't deter other balloonies from giving it a go. Take Matias Perez, for example. Born in Portugal, as a young man, Perez found himself in Cuba, running a shop that made and sold canvas awnings for storefronts. The business helped introduce Perez to the legendary French balloon pilot Eugene Godard in 1856. When Godard saw Perez's keen interest in aeronautics, he invited him up on his next flight aboard the balloon dubbed the Ville De Paris. On May 19, 1856, Godard and Perez took off, flying over Havana. He begged Godard to sell him his balloon, which Godard did for 1,200 in hard pesos, which is about $200,000 today. Perez was desperate to get back into the air as soon as possible, but there was a catch. He had to have permission from the military to launch his balloon. After writing to Cuba's Captain General, Perez waited anxiously for a reply to his request. And when he finally got it, he wasted no time. That very week, Perez transported his balloon to a park in Havana and soon gathered a crowd as he began assembling his aircraft for his second flight. The weather was perfect that Saturday, June 28th, with very few clouds and favorable wind conditions. But as anyone who has spent time on one of those Caribbean islands can attest, the weather there can change quickly. By the time the balloon was ready to launch, ominous low clouds had appeared over Havana, and the wind had picked up markedly. But Perez was too eager to scrub his mission. Plus, people were waiting and watching, including several pretty young ladies Perez had invited to the park to see him fly. So at 7 p.m., Matias Perez dropped the ropes and ascended 200,000 meters to the skies above Cuba. And he was immediately blown northeast over the Atlantic Ocean by warm north winds. From the roof of a building in the harbor, a few men called out to Perez as he passed over them. "Come down," they yelled. The conditions were too dangerous. But Matias Perez ignored their warnings as he soared towards the Florida Peninsula and was never seen again. Not a trace. Feeling somewhat responsible for the incident, Cuba's Captain General sent his military out to search the coastline for Perez. But they failed to even find a scrap of canvas from the Ville De Paris. nor a sliver of wicket from its basket. Perez's body never washed up on shore. He was just gone. In Cuban culture, Perez holds the same place as Amelia Earhart does in Western culture. Today, to express a shorthand for something that has inexplicably vanished, Cubans say, "Voló como Matias Perez," which translates to, "flew like Matias Perez." The country has also issued stamps in the pilot's honor. And he's even been the inspiration for the 1960s comic that imagines Perez was abducted by aliens during his infamous flight. Maybe the comic, however, isn't too far off. After all, Havana and the area in which Matias Perez disappeared does cover one corner of the infamous Bermuda Triangle. And perhaps American author L. Frank Baum was on to something too. In writing The Wizard of Oz, Baum took inspiration from the stories and legends he heard as a child growing up in the mid-19th century. In his classic book, the wizard comes to Oz by way of a wayward hot air balloon blown off course. So maybe, just maybe, Matias Perez was off to be the wizard. Number 2. The Angola 727. On the morning of May 25, 2003, airplane mechanic Ben Padilla told his sister, Benita, in Florida, that he was late for work and he would call her the next day. 19 years later, she's still waiting for that phone call. At the time of his disappearance, Padilla was working for a private company out of Miami that sold and leased airplanes in Africa. On May 26, he and another mechanic were dispatched to a small airport in Angola to check on the status of a Boeing 727 that his company had recently purchased. The plane had had most of its passenger seats removed and replaced with 10 500-gallon fuel tanks. The plan was to use it to transport diesel to some of the many diamond mines in the region. Places where roads had been torn up by war were guarded by mercenaries and where ground transportation was tricky and dangerous. According to the reports, Padilla and the other man, Angolan mechanic John Mutantu, were tasked with getting the plane flight ready and filled with fuel. These reports also said that while the 30-year-old plane was in pretty rough shape, its engines were practically brand new. Witnesses at the airport said they only ever saw Padilla and Mutantu working on the plane that May day. So when the plane inexplicably started taxiing down the runway late in the day, the folks in the control tower were puzzled. Neither one of these two men were trained, let alone certified, to fly a 727. Those Boeings were known to need 3 people working in tandem in the cockpit to even get off the ground. The supervising air traffic controller radioed to the 727 to stop taxiing immediately and return to the hangar. He got no response. Men armed with AK-47s approached the plane, but could do nothing as it gained speed down the dilapidated runway. When the plane lifted off, carrying those 15,000 gallons of diesel fuel, the controller's confusion switched to alarm. It had only been a year and a half since the events of September 11th. Images of that day flew in the minds of those who watched this plane take off. Especially given that the plane had spent 25 years in service to American Airlines, it was still sporting the company's blue and white stripes along its silver side, with a fading red AA logo on the tail. A plane carrying that much fuel could technically, and horribly, be used as a massive bomb. Thankfully, that didn't happen. In fact, nothing happened. After the control tower lost visual contact with the aircraft at about 6 p.m. local time, it was never seen again. There were no Maydays, no ground witness to a crash. No massive explosion was reported due to an impact into the ground, and no massive oil slick was reported due to a crash into the ocean. The plane had simply vanished. And today, 19 years later, it's still missing. The National Transportation Safety Board, the FBI, and even the CIA have been curiously quiet surrounding the events of the missing plane. Some experts believe it was simply stolen for insurance reasons. The Miami company Ben Padilla was working for would eventually report the jet stolen and collect the insurance money, the authorities said. But that never happened. And the FBI cleared the company's owner of wrongdoing after he volunteered to take a lie detector test. The FBI then inexplicably closed his case in 2005, despite the fact that it was still unsolved. Others believe that Padilla stole the plane with the intent of selling it for nefarious purposes: drug running, gun smuggling, human trafficking, take your pick. But Padilla's brother thinks this is hogwash, saying Ben would never have been mixed up in something like that. I know my brother, Joe Padilla told Smithsonian Magazine in 2010. He's not going to do nothing crooked. I know that for a fact. Joe believes that the plane was hijacked on that runway and that Ben Padilla is still out there, being held in some African prison somewhere. Whatever explanations people have speculated over the years, they remain that, speculations. Because the aircraft, along with Ben Padilla and John Matantu, were never seen or heard from again. And that 727 today remains the largest aircraft to have ever disappeared without a trace. Number 1. The F89 Scorpion. On the evening of Monday, November 23, 1953, 27-year-old Felix Eugene Monclaw called Gene by just about everyone he knew, put his supper dishes in the sink, kissed his young wife and 5-month-old daughter goodbye, and headed off to work, never to be seen again. Gene worked as a U.S. Air Force fighter pilot out of Michigan's Kinross Air Force Base. But Kinross wasn't just any old Air Force base. It was part of SAC, or Strategic Air Command. During the Cold War, this command post monitored any threats that might be coming into United States airspace. On the night of November 23rd, the operators monitoring the Ground Control Intercept (GCI) radar saw what they perceived to be a potential threat, a blip on their screen that was not supposed to be there. It was time to scramble the jets, or at least a jet. Gene and his radar operator, 22-year-old Bob Wilson, the goose to his maverick, if you will, climbed into their 2-seat F89 Scorpion interceptor and took to the skies over northern Michigan and Sault Ste. Marie, which is on the border of Michigan and Ontario, Canada. Pilot Monclaw double-checked the coordinates and veered his jet in the direction of the unidentified aircraft. Back on the ground, the Kinross radar operator logged the unknown blip on his circular screen, and then logged the second blip as belonging to Gene's Scorpion. Suddenly, the unknown blip changed direction. The GCI operator radioed Gene its new coordinates, and he veered to give chase on an intercept course. Over the next 30 minutes, the unidentified aircraft changed course and altitude over Michigan as Gene tried to keep up. Finally, Gene's jet and the unidentified aircraft converged in one location, 30,000 feet over Lake Superior, 70 miles off Kaniwa Point. The GCI operator reported that the two blips had merged into one large blip, and then his screen went dark. It seems incredible, the GCI radar man was quoted as saying, but the blip apparently just swallowed our F-89, and so, it seems, were Gene Monclaw and Bob Wilson, without a word. No further radio contact with the ground, no distress signal or mayday. The next day, the search began. Coast Guard cutters from both Canada and the U.S. scoured Lake Superior for any trace of the F89 and its occupants. Despite the fact that the jet was equipped with 2 inflatable rafts and both men were wearing inflatable life jackets, their search came up empty. Officers combed the beaches around Kaniwa Point without finding a single piece of wreckage, not from Jean's jet, nor from the unidentified aircraft they were investigating. The Canadians even dispatched a 6-person team of pararescuers, which included a pioneering nurse named Ruth Kelly, who were ready to parachute into the icy waters of Lake Superior should signs of life be found. But none were. The search was called off after 6 days, and then the questions began. What was that unidentified blip they were chasing down? The official word from the Air Force, which came the very next day, claimed that was a wayward Canadian jetliner. But an exhaustive search revealed that every Canadian passenger jet in operation was accounted for, and none reported seeing anything unusual that night. Another explanation from U.S. authorities was that the mysterious aircraft was actually a Canadian C-47, a World War II-era fighter plane en route to Sudbury, Ontario. It was as if the USAF was eager to blame Canada. But again, this official explanation didn't hold up, especially after the Royal Canadian Air Force issued a press statement denying any Canadian aircraft were involved in the Kinross incident. Vertigo. That was the next explanation put forth by the U.S. Air Force. Jean had been secretly suffering from bouts of vertigo over the years, they said. He must have become disoriented in flight and crashed into Lake Superior. But Jean's young widow knew this explanation was garbage, and she requested, through a journalist, to read the transcripts of Jean's final radio conversation with the ground. The Air Force refused, citing national security concerns. In fact, the AITC, the Aerospace Technical Intelligence Center, has gone on to deny any knowledge of the Kinross incident. According to investigators from a UFO committee, the AITC's official policy is that, quote, there is no record in the Air Force files of a sighting at Kinross on November 23, 1953, and there is no case in the files which even closely parallels those circumstances, unquote. In response, Jean Moncla's widow put up a plaque on her husband's headstone in a Louisiana cemetery that reads, in loving memory of Felix Eugene Moncla, disappeared November 23, 1953, intercepting a UFO over the Canadian border. The memorial serves not only as a testimony to Jean's life, but also a solemn reminder that despite the Air Force's denials, what happened in 1953 profoundly affected Jean's family, unidentified flying object or not. Thank you so much for watching this video. We hope you found it interesting. If you did find it interesting, please make sure you subscribe. We'll have a new video about the paranormal every week. If you just discovered this channel, please make sure you check out our other channel, Criminally Listed. We have over 325 videos featuring bizarre but true crime stories. You can find it at youtube.com/criminallylisted. We also have a podcast about cold cases that were eventually solved called Criminally Listed Presents Into the Killing. You can find it on Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and anywhere you find great podcasts. But that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.